Sign it, Evelyn. That was what my mother-in-law said to me 1 month after my wedding, while the white lilies from my husband's memorial were still dying in crystal bowls around her living room. She slid the folder across the polished black table with 2 fingers, neat, dry, controlled. Graham Sloan, the Whitmore family attorney, stood beside her with the patient face of a man pretending this was administrative cleanup instead of an ambush. Vivian Whitmore did not look like a grieving mother. She looked like a woman trying to close a deal before the market turned. Across the top of the first page in Graham's careful legal language was the phrase I had already started to hate. Renunciation of temporary authority. My left wrist was still wrapped from the crash. The bruising along my collarbone had turned from black to yellow, and every hard breath still felt like glass under my ribs. Vivian looked at those injuries as if they were an inconvenience to her schedule. You cannot keep this family frozen just because you were the one who lived, she said. Not because I was her son's widow, not because I was injured, not because I had buried my husband and still woke up at night hearing metal tear open in the dark, because I was the one who lived. That was the moment I understood she was not asking me to sign for peace. She was asking me to sign because something was slipping away from her and I was standing in the path of it. I put my fingertips on the folder, but did not open it. 1 month earlier, I had still been wearing white. Daniel and I had left our reception through the service exit behind the hotel because he said he needed 10 quiet minutes before the after-party crowd swallowed us again. My wedding shoes were in my hand. My veil was half pulled loose. His tie was hanging crooked, and he kept smiling at me like he still could not believe we had done it. It had been a long night, beautiful in the exhausting way. Weddings are beautiful when everyone else has finally stopped touching you and telling you where to stand. There were still guests inside. Music was still thudding under the ballroom floor. My phone had 6 missed calls from friends who wanted us back in the room. Daniel opened the passenger door for me, took my flowers, kissed my forehead, and said we had exactly 10 minutes before his mother sent a search party. I laughed and told him he was paranoid. He gave me a look I did not fully understand then. It was soft, but there was strain under it. He closed my door, got in on the driver's side, and sat there for a second with both hands on the wheel. Then he said, "After tonight, I am done hiding things from you." I turned toward him. I asked what things. He smiled, but it was thinner now, he said. The kind that made my mother hate the idea of you becoming my wife, more than she hated losing any argument we ever had. I remember telling him that was a terrible thing to say to a bride in a wedding dress. I remember him reaching for my hand and saying, "After the honeymoon, I will show you everything." Then he leaned across the console because my phone had slipped into the gap beside the seat. His shoulder came toward me. My body turned a little toward him. It was a tiny movement, one of those meaningless seconds that feel invisible while they are happening. The truck hit us less than a breath later. I never remember the sound correctly. My mind keeps changing it. Sometimes it is a blast. Sometimes it is metal folding like paper. Sometimes it is only the strangled cry that tore out of my own throat when the world snapped sideways and the windshield became a storm of glittering knives. The impact came hard from Daniel's side. The car spun. My head slammed back. Something broke in the dark. My chest locked. I tasted blood and smoke and the bitter chemical stink of the airbags. When the car stopped moving, I was hanging against the belt with my dress twisted around my legs and my ears ringing so hard I thought I had gone deaf. Daniel was slumped toward me. I said his name once, then louder again. I tried to reach him, but pain shot so hard through my arm that my vision flashed white. His face was cut. His head was at the wrong angle. There was blood on the front of his shirt that did not look real at first because wedding lights were still flickering in the distance behind us, and the whole scene felt staged like something a camera would stop any second. I knew before anyone said it. I knew because I kept saying his name and he never looked at me again. Hands pulled at my door. Someone shouted that there was fuel leaking. A man I never saw clearly kept telling me to stay still, stay with him, keep looking at him. I fought them because Daniel was still in the car. They pinned my shoulders. I screamed his name until my chest tore. One of the paramedics looked past me toward him, and the look in his eyes emptied me out. At the hospital, the doctor did not use gentle language. He used trained language, efficient language. Your husband did not survive the impact. I do not remember screaming then. I remember the absence of sound. The room became colorless. The sheets felt too white. Somebody had cut off the sleeve of my wedding gown, and I kept staring at the torn lace like it mattered. Vivian arrived before dawn in a black coat over a cream silk blouse, as composed as if she had been called into a board crisis, not a morgue. She held my hand while a nurse was in the room. She stroked my knuckles. She called me darling. She said we would get through this together. The nurse left. Vivian let go of my hand and asked where Daniel's phone was. That was the first thing she said when we were alone. I told her I did not know. I asked where his things were. She said the police had turned over the personal effects, and that Celeste was collecting anything sensitive before the press turned this into a feast. Then she told me not to worry about the practical side because family would handle family matters. I asked to see his phone. She said not now, not later, not after you rest, not when you are stronger. Not now. Celeste came in carrying coffee and a legal pad, like a woman stepping into a strategy session. Her mascara was perfect. Her voice was low and careful. She said Daniel's watch, wallet, and cufflinks had all been logged. She said anything related to the company or trust structure would need to stay with their office for review. Their office. Not his widow. Not the police. Not me. The funeral happened while I was still moving through pain medication and concussion fog. People touched my shoulders and told me Daniel had loved me fiercely. Investors came. Family friends came. Board members came. There were white flowers everywhere. Vivian stood at the front with tears balanced neatly in her eyes, and received condolences like a queen accepting tribute. Graham Sloan came to me after the burial, with a leather folder under one arm. He said there were a few temporary documents that might spare me stress while I recovered. I said I was standing over fresh dirt and did not intend to sign anything. He smiled like I had misunderstood a calendar invite and said the language was merely protective. It would allow the family to keep internal matters stable until I was physically and emotionally able to decide how involved I wished to be. I asked him involved in what. He paused too long. Then he said, in any internal administrative matters Daniel may have left open. That pause stayed with me. So did the way Vivian watched my face instead of his while he spoke. A few days later, they moved me into one of the guest suites at the Whitmore house, because according to Vivian, no widow should be alone in her first weeks. It sounded generous. It felt like monitored containment. The driver was always ready when I needed to go anywhere. My physical therapy appointment was rescheduled without my consent. My credit card failed at a pharmacy because according to their finance office, there had been a temporary hold on personal charges associated with family reimbursement. Daniel's laptop was nowhere in sight. His phone never appeared. Neither did the slim brushed steel USB drive he used to keep hidden inside the little box where he stored his cufflinks. I only realized it was missing because one afternoon they sent up a sealed carton of items recovered from the wedding and the hospital. His watch was there. His tie clip was there. One cufflink was bent. The small metal box was there too. It was empty. Daniel had shown me that hiding spot once as a joke. He said if his family ever claimed they had never taught him anything practical, at least they had taught him how to protect what mattered from people with polished manners. I took the empty box downstairs and asked Mrs. Dalton, the longtime housekeeper who had handled Daniel's personal effects before they were cataloged. She went still in that old servant way, the kind that means loyalty is fighting fear. I asked again. Quietly, she said, Miss Celeste went through the items first before the supplemental inventory review, before outside eyes were meant to touch any of it. Then she said she wished she had told me sooner, and walked away before I could answer. That evening, Graham returned with a second set of documents. These were less polite than the first. The language referred to temporary authority, administrative access, voting restraint, and non-interference with protected family operations. It was written as if I already possessed a power no one had yet explained to me, and as if my signature was needed to calm a problem I had apparently become just by surviving. I asked Graham why he kept asking me to renounce rights no one had ever formally told me I had. He smiled again, but tighter this time. He said, standard precaution. I said, then why does everyone in this house look frightened every time I do not sign? He did not answer that one. A month after the crash, Vivian held a private memorial dinner at the house for close family and a few selected members of the Whitmore Advisory Circle. It was framed as a quiet act of remembrance. In practice, it was a stage. The candles were low. Daniel's photograph sat beside a bowl of white roses. 2 members of the family board were there. Graham was there. Celeste was there, in charcoal silk, carrying grief on her face like expensive makeup. Vivian gave a speech about loss, legacy, and the unbearable cruelty of burying a child. She spoke beautifully, controlled, weighted, every sentence placed like crystal. Then, while people were still holding wine glasses and dabbing their eyes, Graham laid the third folder in front of me. He said it would be best for everyone if uncertainty ended tonight. I opened the first page. This version did not pretend anymore. It required me to relinquish temporary voting control over certain emergency-restricted transactions, waive access to internal review files initiated by Daniel, and acknowledge that all board-level authority connected to Whitmore Holdings should revert immediately to family control. Family control, not lawful control, not fiduciary continuity. Family control. I said I was married to Daniel for less than a day, and somehow that is enough to make all of you this desperate. Celeste set down her glass and looked straight at me. That is exactly the problem, she said. You were his wife for less than a day, and now half this house has to wait for your permission to breathe. The room went very quiet. One of the older board members looked sharply at Graham. Vivian did not rebuke Celeste. She only lowered her eyes as though sorrow prevented her from managing anyone's tone. But I saw it then, not grief. Fear. If you were me, still aching every time you stood up straight, and people started sliding legal paper toward you before the flowers from your husband's memorial had even died, would you sign for peace, or keep the pen still one more day? I got my answer the next morning. The call came from a state investigator assigned to the crash review. He asked if I could meet without informing the Whitmore family. I said yes before he explained why. Henry Pike, the truck driver who hit us, had changed his statement. The investigator did not tell me more on the phone. He only said there had been a confession, and the confession changed the nature of the case. I met them in a plain interview room that smelled like stale coffee and copy paper. Henry Pike looked older than I expected. Not predatory, not slick, just wrung out. Like a man who had not slept properly since the night he destroyed my life. He could not hold my eyes for long. He said he had taken money through an intermediary to force our car off the road after we left the reception. He said he had been shown photographs of me in my wedding dress along with the make color and plate details of the car. He said he was told the bride would be in the passenger seat, and that if the collision looked like loss of control after a late-night reception, the rest would disappear into rain speed and bad luck. I asked him whether he had known Daniel was in the vehicle. He said of course he knew there was a groom. He just had not expected the angle to change. He had not expected Daniel to lean across toward me at the moment of impact. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. I thought they wanted you gone, not him. I could not speak for a few seconds after that. I asked whether he knew who paid him. He said not directly. Money moved through a man who moved through a company. The voice on the phone had been disguised, but he said there had been a woman giving instructions in one call, and if he heard that voice again even altered, he thought he would know it. The investigator slid a paper toward me. It summarized the revised statement. I looked down at the page. Bride targeted, planned, forced road departure, wedding, departure timing. Then I looked back up at Henry Pike and understood something worse. Until that moment, I had assumed the horror was that someone had wanted me dead. But sitting in that room looking at Henry Pike, I understood something worse. They had not just tried to destroy a bride. They had tried to erase Daniel's new wife before she could become a problem they could not manage. Daniel leaning toward me had changed the angle, changed, the death changed everything. Their plan had missed me and taken him instead. And in doing that, it had created the very thing they were now desperate to strip away his lawful widow with temporary authority they could not safely seize in daylight. That night, Nora Bell called me not to open anything, not yet, but to ask me to meet her in person. I did not know her name then, but Daniel had mentioned her once in the vaguest possible way. He had called her the one person in his professional world his mother could not charm, frighten, or buy. She said Daniel had left sealed instructions that could only be released if something happened within 30 days of the wedding, and only if I came to her myself with the private confirmation phrase he had written down. Then she asked me one question. Do you know what he meant by south window, no witnesses? I started crying before I could stop myself because that was what Daniel had whispered to me the day he proposed. Not in a restaurant, not in front of family. Just the two of us by the south window in his apartment with the city below us and no witnesses but the glass. Nora opened the file. The emergency packet was not romantic. It was precise. A few days before the wedding, Daniel had executed a temporary protective structure tied to his marriage. If he died or became incapacitated within 30 days after the ceremony, I, as his lawful spouse, would hold temporary blocking authority over a narrow group of major transactions touching Whitmore Holdings, certain trust assets, and a pending restructuring. Daniel had started questioning. He had also directed that I be granted access to an internal review file he had been building regarding suspicious conduct around family-managed entities. Most important, any document requiring me to surrender those temporary rights during the first 30 days would be invalid without Nora Bell's independent certification. Graham had known exactly what he was doing. Vivian had too. Nora looked at me across the desk and said, "They have been hurrying because time is working against them, not against you." Then she showed me the second part, a short video from Daniel. He looked tired in it, not afraid exactly, more like a man who had spent too long pretending a dangerous problem could wait until after the wedding. He said, "If you are seeing this, then things went wrong faster than I hoped. I am sorry. I should have told you more before we got married, but I wanted one clean day for us. Just one." He took a breath and looked down for a second before continuing. He said he had started to suspect his mother was using family-controlled entities to push through transactions that crossed legal and ethical lines, and that Graham had been smoothing those lines instead of stopping them. He said Celeste had gotten involved in places she should not have had access to. He said if anyone rushed me to sign anything after a crisis, I should understand one thing immediately. They would only rush if they believed I had something they could not safely take in daylight. Then Daniel looked back into the camera and said, "If they press you in public, let them. People like my mother only lose control when they believe they are still in command of the room." I sat there with tears drying on my face, and Daniel's last usable gift to me spread across Nora's desk in neat numbered tabs. "When the man you buried leaves you one last path through the fire, do you collapse or open the next page?" And if you like smart revenge stories where the paperwork cuts deeper than the shouting, subscribe and stay with me, because that was the moment I stopped grieving like prey and started reading like his widow. The next night, I went back to the Whitmore house and found Vivian in the library with a drink she had not touched. She took one look at my face and knew something had changed. She asked whether Graham had sent over revised language for the board meeting. I said, "Why are you so afraid of one woman with a bandaged wrist and a marriage certificate?" She told me not to be melodramatic. I asked why they kept trying to make me sign away rights they claimed I was too insignificant to possess. She said Daniel had been impulsive, emotional, poorly advised. I said, "You mean he put something in place you thought would disappear if I died with him?" For 1 second, only one, her expression slipped. Then she said, "This would have been simpler if that night had ended the way it should have." She caught herself the moment the words left her mouth, but I had heard them. So had she. Graham's formal invitation to the emergency board stabilization meeting arrived the next morning. The language was polished and false. It said the meeting's purpose was orderly continuity after tragedy. Nora and I both knew the real goal was to force a signature in front of witnesses, then claim the matter had been handled with dignity and consensus. We prepared in layers. First, Nora would establish that Daniel's emergency structure was valid, and that Graham's waiver documents were defective without her certification. Second, I would introduce Henry Pike's revised statement and destroy the fiction of an ordinary accident. Third, Nora would walk the room through the timeline after the crash, Celeste accessing Daniel's personal effects before proper review, Graham drafting renunciation documents before Daniel had even been buried, Vivian directing the seizure of Daniel's phone and internal devices, a suspicious payment path linked to an outside intermediary now under review by investigators. Not enough on its own to convict anyone of murder in a conference room. More than enough to stop any responsible board or bank from letting Vivian Whitmore touch another protected transaction while daylight was finally being turned on. The boardroom was all dark wood, filtered sunlight, and polished restraint. Vivian entered wearing black silk and widow's pearls, though she had not lost a husband. Celeste carried a portfolio. Graham arranged folders in front of each attendee, with the quiet confidence of a man who thought procedure itself was loyal to him. 2 senior advisory members sat across from us. So did a representative from the private bank handling several Whitmore-linked structures. That mattered. Daniel had been right. His mother cared less about grief than optics, and nothing scares people like Vivian more than a banker going still. Graham began with a solemn statement about continuity, discretion, and respect for family pain. Then he slid the marked signature page toward me and said all that remained was my acknowledgement. I picked up the pen. I let the silence stretch. Then I set the pen back down. "I am not signing this," I said. "Not because I am too fragile to understand it, but because Daniel made sure none of you could strip this authority without independent review." Graham frowned as if I had recited something in the wrong language. Nora Bell stepped in from the side entrance and took the empty chair at my right. The room changed instantly. She introduced herself. She cited Daniel's emergency provisions. She stated calmly, and without flourish, that any renunciation document presented to me within the 30-day post-marriage protection window was invalid without her certification, and that she had certified nothing. The bank representative looked at Graham. One board member asked why the packet in front of them omitted any mention of Daniel's independent post-marriage directives. Graham began to answer, then did not finish the sentence. Nora placed a second folder on the table. She explained that Daniel had granted me temporary blocking authority over a defined category of major actions and had specifically directed that I receive access to an internal review file if a triggering event occurred. The triggering event, she said, had occurred. Vivian finally spoke. She said Daniel had been emotional after the engagement, and that none of us should let a widow's confusion turn a private loss into a governance circus. That was when I placed Henry Pike's revised statement in the center of the table. "This was not an ordinary loss," I said. "The driver has confessed." No one moved. I said he admitted he had been paid to force our car off the road after we left the wedding. I said he had been shown photographs of me in my dress. I said he believed I was the intended casualty. Celeste whispered my name like a warning. Vivian tried to cut in and call it irrelevant to the meeting. I looked at her and said, "It is only irrelevant if you ignore the fact that the person your attorney has spent a month trying to disarm is the same person the driver believed he was hired to erase." That landed. The board member on my left lowered his glasses. The bank representative opened the statement and began reading. Then Nora moved to the third layer. She laid out the post-crash timeline with deadly simplicity. Celeste accessing Daniel's effects before proper review. Graham's first renunciation draft created before the funeral. Device seizure directives. Email restrictions. Financial pressure. Repeated efforts to have me waive rights no one had properly disclosed. Nora said, "No responsible institution can treat this pattern as ordinary family management." The bank representative asked for the payment trail summary. Nora handed it over. It was not a clean line to Vivian. "Not yet." but it was enough to show that funds tied to a Whitmore-controlled service entity had moved toward an intermediary now appearing in the criminal investigation around Henry Pike's payment route. Vivian's voice changed then. It lost polish. She said Daniel had jeopardized everything for a woman he had known for too short a time. She said he had tied up family control in the hands of an outsider because he was blinded by sentiment. She said he had nearly handed decades of work to someone who had been Whitmore by law for a matter of hours, and there it was. No one had accused her of loving power more than her son. She announced it herself. I looked at her and said, "You do not sound like a mother who lost her child. You sound like a woman who lost control of the table." No one answered. No one defended her. The board suspended all action on the documents immediately. The bank representative stated that no new authorizations touching the protected categories would proceed until a full independent review was completed. Graham was directed to preserve all communications relating to the waiver packets and post-accident administrative measures. Nora formally confirmed that my temporary authority remained intact under Daniel's emergency structure. For the first time since the crash, someone in that room used my full legal name with the respect it was supposed to carry. Evelyn Harper Whitmore, not the bride who survived, not the widow in recovery, not the outsider, his lawful wife. After the meeting, Vivian stopped me in the corridor outside the boardroom. The sunlight from the tall windows made her look older than she had in the dark rooms of her house. Smaller too, but not weak, never weak. Women like Vivian only change shape, they do not soften. She told me I was destroying the family Daniel had been born into. I told her I was only preventing her from using Daniel's death as the key to everything he no longer trusted you to control. She asked whether I really believed he would have chosen me over his own blood. I said he already did. He chose me in writing. Then I walked away before she could turn pain into theater again. I did not heal that day. I did not stop missing him. I did not leave that building feeling triumphant in the bright, simple way revenge stories sometimes pretend happens when the bad people finally lose a room. I left with cracked ribs that still hurt in cold weather. I left with a dead husband. I left with a criminal investigation widening behind me and a family name that no longer felt like shelter. But I also left with the truth. My wedding night ended in a crash. My husband died. I lived. 1 month later, the driver confessed. That was not the end of the horror. That was when I learned the worst thing waiting inside grief is not always death itself. Sometimes it is the living people standing beside the flowers already calculating what your survival will cost them. If the woman who held your arm at the funeral is the same one who cannot wait to strip your name off the paper, do you expose her the second you know or let her keep speaking until the whole room finally hears what she is? I let Vivian Whitmore keep speaking. And by the time she was done, Daniel had taken the room back through me. If you like smart revenge stories where the truth hits harder than power, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.